Hello, welcome to another book review here with Clint Dawson at Author's Corner. Today we are reviewing The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. Now here's the thing about this book. Most book reviews that I do, I genuinely do like. That's why I wanted to throw in a couple where I had as much is as I did ahs. And while I respect Tad Williams as a author, let's just get into it, shall we? So The Dragonbone Chair is the first in the series of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. It was written by Tad Williams. It's his second published book. It's the first book he says himself in many interviews that he knew was going to be published. It is high fantasy. Couple things about The Dragonbone Chair. It's been out for like 30-something years. It has aged well with critics. It was kind of considered the bridge between Tolkien-esque fantasy, classic fantasy, into modern fantasy because it has a lot of that old style feel if you're into classic fantasy bookends, like The Silmarillion and, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. Tolkien is by far one of my favorite authors of all time. Then this is a nice bridge, but it also spends a lot of time in character development and giving them modern problems and issues that you find in a lot of modern fantasy where people can relate to the characters in a broad scoping story. They can still find a little bit of themselves. So this is a good bridge. Tad Williams does that very effectively. Let's cover, in order, plot, characters, and pacing. So for the plot, we're in the mystical land of Osten-Ard, and Prester John, the High King that has been loved by most, if not all the land, and has brought them together, he's on his deathbed, boom, going straight into the opening of the book. He has two sons. The son that's going to inherit the throne is a huge a-hole. His younger son, who does not inherit, is your typical, he's nice to peasants, he's nice to nobility, he treats everyone the same, and he's just the perfect model of what a king should be. However, just like in real life, those most fit to lead usually aren't the ones that end up leading. Now, the story centers around a very familiar trope of a young kitchen boy named Simon. Simon, this is a coming-of-age story for Simon. He doesn't know anything outside the world of the castle. He has a mentor that happens to be the court musician, if you will, the court sorcerer, soothsayer, what have you. The first third of the book, Simon is being taught about the outside world and seeing the political struggles that happen within Osten-Ard and how everyone's dealing with it. The second half of the book, where the climax happens and something visibly and emotionally shakes Simon to where he has to escape the castle, he goes on this journey out into the world and he meets with this troll called Binnebeck. Binnebeck kind of takes over as his mentor and teaches him about the world and how to respond to things. And Simon is very brazen as a young teenager, as most teenagers, especially teenagers, boys are. And Binnebeck kind of grooms him to become socially acceptable, something that most people growing up can relate to. They go out into the world and they find this group called the League of Scrolls, which is a bunch of scholars and philosophers ready for this impending evil. There is a group of elves known as Scythi. Now, they are not normal elves. The Scythi have their own twist, and Tad Williams does a really good job of describing them as a culture, and they're not the typical elves you find in fantasy. And they have a ruler who is, for lack of a better word, undead and very mystical and magically inclined, and they live up in the frozen north. Okay? They have to find 3 swords. Thus the title of the series, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And the reason they have to find these swords is because they have to defeat this grand elf Scythy king of the undead. In this first book, they look for the first sword. That's pretty much the extent of the story without giving out any spoilers. The end of the story finds the younger prince that did inherit the kingdom. He kind of comes into this little tiff with his brother who becomes the king. Because the new king, like I said, is an a-hole, and he wants to cause strife and mayhem and war and wants to assert his dominance. So Simon, along with the League of Scrolls, ends up teaming up with the younger prince to kind of hold off this rebellion and look for these swords. And that's, in essence, where the story ends without me giving any spoilers. Now, going from plot into the characters, okay? The characters, there's a lot. There is a lot. If you are into A Song of Ice and Fire series by J.R.R. Martin, this will not be hard for you to follow along. I personally love that series, so I'm basically ingrained in that kind of storytelling as far as high fantasy goes. Alright y'all, I'm editing this video. Quick side note, I'm cringing, and I was like, oh, no, I only said it once. No, I said it every single time. George R.R. Martin, I referred to him by his initials, and I kept saying J.R.R. Martin instead of G.R.R. Martin when I heard G in my head. So chalk that up to I don't know what, but I apologize to the entire Song of Ice and Fire community. I am a huge fan of George R.R. Martin, and I meant G.R.R. Martin. Alright, now, back to the video. If you are not into that, or not used to it, it can be kind of hard to follow along with the characters. There is a glossary and an appendix at the back. You will need it. A lot of the characters have their own particular elements. They're very well fleshed out. The book is over 600 pages and only covers a third of Simon's story in Austenard. So you have this essence of taking the time to get to know the characters, especially Simon, the main protagonist. Pacing is where I had a problem with the story. All the good things I said about the plot and the characters and the characterization and fleshing them out, their wants and their needs and endearing them to us, that comes at a cost, it seems, with Mr. Williams because he can't flush out a middle ground with the two. The pacing is horrendously slow. I only got this because I was in Barnes & Noble, and there's a quote from J.R.R. Martin on the front that says, "Inspired me to write my own 7-book trilogy. It's one of my favorite fantasy series." J.R.R. Martin takes a lot of political license and pretty much rips off this, but everyone's buying his books and reading it, and that's a whole nother video that I'll do later on. So based on a beloved author that I follow, I got this. Well, Simon doesn't leave the castle for probably, I think it's like almost 200 pages. So we're literally sitting here learning about this kid's strife and how he's reacting to the world for almost 200 pages before, we go out into the world. Before we leave the castle walls, a third of the book is done. That was very hard for me. Plus, I don't like Simon as a character. While he was well fleshed out, he's a very annoying kid and does not overcome his inability to be a likable character until dang near 2/3 of the way through the book. It was very hard for me. However, just because Tad Williams wants to take his time and explain everything, it's not a bad thing. Like I said, it depends on what kind of a reader you are. I'm into high fantasy. I'm into doorstops, so that didn't really bother me. I expected there to be some expository, and I expected there to be a lot of, info dumping, which is fine in a setup book. There was a lot. An insane amount. For 600 pages, I would have accepted maybe 50 pages of info dumping, but it's scattered throughout the book, which makes the pacing incredibly slow. It's just another factor. One of the ways I feel Mr. Williams could have spread that out is, there's a phrase when you're writing, show not tell. So there's a lot of exposition. Instead of sprinkling out names and characters and slowly giving us this information, and I'll break off to George R. R. Martin. We hear about the wall, the big wall, for anyone who's read it. We hear about it in the first couple pages, but we don't really know the essence behind it, the history behind it, and why it's important. Mr. Williams says, hey, this is important, this is why, this is when it was created, this is why everyone wants it, and it's like all just dumped on you all at once in a couple of compact pages, and every single thing that's important, it's like that throughout the entire book. So pacing for me was probably a 4 out of a 10. Characterizations was an 8 out of a 10, and the story, because of the pacing and how much I disliked the character of Simon, the story for me was probably a 6 out of 10. I'm hoping when I read the sequel that it'll get better. I want to finish it. I refuse to start a series and not finish it. I've only done that with one in my entire life, and it was many years ago. So I'm going to continue to read Tad Williams. However, if you have the same things that you look for in a high fantasy novel that I do, and you hear the things I dislike, do what I did. I got the sequel on audiobook. It's like 46 hours, which would probably take me twice as long to read, and I don't want to do that. So overall, I respect Ted Williams as an author. What he did for the fantasy community was astounding. I can tell that he has heart. I can tell that he put thought into this story. Just pacing is not one of his strong points. And I'm about 40% maybe through the second book, and even hearing it on audiobook, again, it's not something where, oh, he's a new author and he had 3 years in between to write the books, and pacing is not something that he improved upon. I'm just going to chalk that down to that's his writing style, and then if that's the case, I'm fine with it, and those who are not fine with it, don't buy the book. But if you want a good engrossing story that has the potential to go somewhere, I mean, it's famous 30 years later. A lot of books don't stand the test of time in the fantasy world. There's only a few scattered names that I can count less than on my 10 fingers that have withstood the test of time for that long. So, Tad Williams, The Dragonbone Chair, I'm going to have a link down below to where you can actually check it out if you want for the paperback version, or get it on Kindle if you want. If you don't like it, then you've only spent $2.99, US dollars anyway. So that's my overall reach of Dragonbone Chair. I hope you guys like this review. I hope it was helpful for you on whether you want to get into it and try a new facet of fantasy that is kind of considered the bridge by critics between classic fantasy and modern fantasy, or you might want to give this one a hard pass. It's up to you. But I will finish the series, and I will be doing a review for the next 2 books. Alright, y'all, you have a great day.